Hello. Oh, we are live. Okay, I just have to begin. No introduction. All right, let me get the slides then. No worries. I'll just start and I hope that people can hear me and everything. So, introduction to app development with .NET Maui. I heard there were some technical difficulties from time to time. There was a little flash, and I heard someone speak there in person. So I hope you are getting started for the day. I must be honest, I don't know how late it is for you, but good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching this. Basically, for me, it's good morning. It's 8 a.m. in the morning. Um, so yeah, before we start, I want to take a little moment and stand still with the horrible things because this event, it's hosted in Pakistan. So the horrible things that are happening there right now, I hope your family members and friends are okay, or that they will be. So yeah, good luck to you, all the strength, and I hope it will all be okay. So with that, we're here to talk about happier things. And my name is Gerald. I come from you live from the Netherlands at the moment. I work at Microsoft, and I'm working on the actual .NET Maui team. You can find me on Twitter. Here's my email address. Excuse me. Although, if you have any questions, please do so on Twitter or something like that, because, then other people who are smarter than me can also help answer the question that you might have. But if it's really something that you're not comfortable sharing in public, please send me an email. I also am on YouTube, where I have a little channel with all kinds of Maui stuff, a little bit of Blazor, a little bit of everything. So make sure to subscribe there if that's what you're interested in. So, what is .NET Maui? Well, because you're here, you probably already know a little bit about what .NET Maui is, right? But let me tell you so that everyone is kind of like the same baseline, everyone knows what we're talking about. And it's the evolution of Xamarin Forms. And Xamarin Forms has been our product at Microsoft for cross-platform app development based on C#, .NET, and you can create apps for iOS, Android, and macOS. Now, on the little line there, it might be a little bit small. I don't know how big the room is. Maybe all the way in the back, it's a little bit small to read. There's also Tizen, Linux, WPF, and macOS. Those were kind of like the targets, the platforms that we supported, but not officially. So there were a lot of enthusiastic community members who kind of like created the Linux, the WPF, and the macOS backends for us, which is really great. Tizen is a platform from Samsung, so they run, I think, on TVs, on watches, on fridges. I don't know, all kinds of stuff. So that's really amazing, and they've been very helpful implementing Tizen for Xamarin Forms. They really, are right behind us implementing all the features, and now they're also doing it for .NET Maui. So I didn't really update my slides yet, but Tizen is also supported for .NET Maui. Now, Xamarin Forms, it's already kind of like, I don't know if this is a true story or not. I like to believe it is. But Xamarin Forms, already the name is a little bit boring, right? Forms, you think of like, I have to fill in some forms. It's totally boring. And also, if you go back to like the website, so if you know the full history, Xamarin was a separate company, and then it was acquired by Microsoft. And I think even before it was acquired, they had this on their website. Which Xamarin approach is best for you? Now, then you have to know that you can do Xamarin with like still writing C# and .NET, but more like Java and Objective-C-ish. And then you have Xamarin Forms, right? So here you can see Xamarin Forms is best for, and it doesn't even matter what it says like in the bullet points, right? But you can see the screenshots. Xamarin Forms is best for, and then you have a couple of boring gray boxes. And then suddenly, if you go to Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android, those are best for creating media players and creating games and creating maps, cool things. All the cool things happen there. And that's kind of like the image that stuck with Xamarin Forms as well. And maybe, Xamarin Forms was architected with that in mind for like the data entry applications, the simple applications, maybe even just prototyping. That's what I hear hear a lot of people saying as well. But people wanted more. And with Xamarin Forms, you could totally do more. The way it was set up, everyone could just inherit from our renderers on how we set things up, and people were going to implement crazy things, right? So they were adding those maps, they were adding all kinds of crazy designs and all the things that you can imagine, basically. But Xamarin Forms wasn't really architected with that in mind, so the performance was kind of lagging behind. It was not really great near the end, so that's why we decided to basically take all the learnings of 6, 7, 8 years of Xamarin Forms. It's been around for that long already, and turn that into a new product, which we called .NET Maui. And with that, we also become like a first-class citizen in the .NET framework, which is really amazing. So, this is just a whole new start, basically. And .NET Maui stands for Multi-Platform App UI. We made the P lowercase because else it would be .NET Maui, which would be a little bit funny, but, here we are. So .NET Maui is now our solution for cross-platform apps, still based on C# and .NET, but now for iOS, Android, Windows, and macOS. So that's a little bit different than for Xamarin Forms, right? Because now we have still iOS, Android. We're not calling it UWP anymore. UWP is a thing of the past. It won't be supported anymore. So it's now Windows, which technically runs on WinUI, which is the new hot thing. And macOS is now like fully supported right from the start, right? So that's really cool. We have this new energy, this new focus on desktop as well. So that's cool. If you're coming from Xamarin Forms, then you're probably going to be really happy because 90% of the APIs are going to be exactly the same. But under the hood, the whole thing has been re-architected from like the ground up, right? So we've rewritten all the things. There are no more renderers. We now have handlers and mappers, which is much, much faster. The Android startup time has been something that we've really focused on to get that better. We now have the generic host builder that you can already know from like ASP.NET maybe, so that you can, whenever you know that you how to work with that, already know how to start with .NET Maui. So all these things that we're going to see basically in this session, hopefully. So if we capture all of that in one sentence, it would be .NET Maui is the most productive way to develop native apps that perform great on any device that runs Android, iOS, macOS, or Windows from a single code base. And that single code base has now been more true than ever before, basically. So how does it work? If we take a step back, like if we're going to be an architect about this and draw little boxes on a whiteboard, what does it look like? Well, here we have like the 4 SDKs at the bottom, right? That's Android, iOS, macOS, and Windows, with all their tooling, all their things, all their languages. Oh, I'm not looking at the right thing. Here we go. So how does it all work? That was what I was going to tell you. I was lagging behind on the slide. Sorry about that. So here we have the SDKs, right? You want to create an app and you want to roll it out on Android, iOS, macOS, and Windows, preferably at least 2, right? Because if you're going to use just one platform, you could still use .NET Maui if that's what you want. If you enjoy working with that, totally fine. But if you know for sure that it's only going to run on that one platform, .NET Maui doesn't have that much extra, right? It doesn't offer you all the power of writing that code once and rolling it out on all the platforms. So yeah, if you really want to leverage that power, you probably want to use it at least on 2 platforms. But if you enjoy working with .NET Maui, which you should, then you can totally do it for one platform as well. And it also, you want to focus on that app code, right? That's your business logic. That is the $1 million idea that's going to make you rich. This app is going to make you rich, and that's the stuff that you want to focus on, right? That's where you want to be most productive. Now, like I said, we already have all these SDKs, so you want to build your app for 2 of these platforms or all of these platforms, but now you have to learn like Java or Kotlin with all the Android stuff, Android Studio. For iOS, you need to learn Swift or Objective-C and use Xcode. I don't know if you've ever started Xcode, but it's very scary. So all that kind of stuff. And of course, Windows is easy, right? That's already a Visual Studio. That's already C#. So we're familiar with that. That's good. But how are we going to get from like these SDKs, from all that tooling, all that stuff to our app code, right? How are we going to do that with .NET Maui? Well, the first layer of this cake is the .NET runtime. And the .NET runtime is what executes all of our .NET code, basically. So if you really dive into this, if you zoom into this, then you'll see that on every platform except for Windows, this is still running on Mono. And Mono is the open source implementation of the .NET framework, basically. But we fully adopted that. We've integrated that into the whole .NET ecosystem that we have right now. So it doesn't really matter because now, as of .NET 6, we have the .NET Base Class Library, which is, the thing that you're programming against. That's kind of like the core of the .NET framework. And that's exactly the same for .NET 6 for all the platforms. So that's what you're programming against. You will never know if it runs against Mono or the core CLR. It doesn't really matter for you. Now, on top of that, we have .NET for Android, .NET for iOS, and WinUI. If you've been working with Xamarin Forms before, then you know these as Xamarin.Android, Xamarin.iOS, and WinUI wasn't a thing back then. That would have been UWP, basically. So we are just renaming that a little bit. It's more like a marketing rename, because if you've been working with like traditional Xamarin, as we called it, you already had like the Java-like namespaces, right? I mentioned that earlier, and the Objective-C-like namespaces, and it was C# code and it was .NET, but it would still use all the type names and stuff from iOS and Android. So nothing's going to change there. We're not going to rename namespaces. It never had Xamarin Forms in there. It never had Xamarin in there. So it won't have Maui in there now. You can just use that with .NET 6 if that's what you want. But the name is going to be a little bit different because we're getting rid of the Xamarin name. So you have all these things, and we need to have this, right? A lot of people are asking me like, hey, is that going away? I think we might push these products less as separate products. We're going to focus on .NET Maui. That's going to be our product. But we still need to have this, right? Because these are bindings to all the APIs on Android and iOS and Windows. To enable you to write this code in C# and .NET. And they will do the translation to the Objective-C code and the Java code and that kind of stuff. But we need this for .NET Maui to work, right? So we cannot get rid of this. And then on top of that, we have .NET Maui, right? So if you know how to work with .NET Maui, that's the abstraction layer that we're adding now. So whenever you specify a button in that abstract layer, we're going to translate that through the .NET for Android or the .NET for iOS layer, however that button should look like on that platform. And then ultimately, you only need to know how to work with .NET Maui, what your app code should be. That's kind of like the most important thing. And now you can create a app with a single code base for all of these platforms. So that is really, really amazing. Now, because of all that history, with Xamarin Forms, we've been around for a long, long time. And that means we are not just getting started with one control, right? And with the very basics. We already have a rich library of controls. We already have 40 plus controls. We have all kinds of navigation with a flyout menu, so the hamburger menu. We have the bottom tabs. We have top tabs that are now a thing. Well, I think the top tabs have always been a thing on Android. Or am I confused? I always confuse the two. Doesn't matter. We have top tabs, we have bottom tabs, and we have all these kinds of adaptive layouts, which is now more important than ever, right? Because we're not just focusing on mobile devices, but we're also focusing on desktop devices now. So the adaptive layouts are now more important than ever, so that your content automatically scales to the form factor that you're running it on. We have a renewed focus on right to left. So right to left was always something for Xamarin Forms like, we might have forgotten about that a little bit, but we now took that, implemented in all the things. So right to left should be supported. You could just switch it over and it should work all fine. And also the same thing for accessibility, which is super, super important, but it wasn't really built into Xamarin Forms. But now we have people on the team who are really focused on that accessibility and getting it right. We're constantly testing with all kinds of accessibility teams. So that's really great, because if we make it easier for you to include accessibility inside of the apps, then everyone wins, right? Because you have more accessible apps. The people who need those apps can use them more easily, and we have more inclusive apps. So that's really, really amazing. Now, if you put that in a little overview, this is it running on Windows. Again, it might be a little bit small, but this is, I think, most of the controls in here. So you can see buttons, you can see images. With those images, you can clip them with a round or a custom shape if that's what you want. Sliders, entries, date pickers. We got all the basic controls to get you started, basically. So how does that work? If you are familiar with Xamarin Forms, or maybe even any other Microsoft product, because all the Microsoft products basically use XAML, C#, and MVVM, right? So you'll feel right at home. If you're used to working with WPF, fine, you'll feel right at home. If you have been working with UWP, that will work too. Of course, we wouldn't be Microsoft if we didn't change kind of like a couple of property names, so to confuse you and you still have to learn some things. No, that's not the reason, of course. We don't to do that to directly tease you, but I think when this started as a separate company in Xamarin, they maybe couldn't even use the kind of like official names, if that makes sense. And I think also they changed a couple of names because that would fit better in like the mobile devices space, right? It doesn't really make sense to have something called clicked, although there's still a clicked whenever you could call it tapped, right? Because you were tapping on mobile devices, at least back then. So I think there were a couple of renames because of that. But anyway, the XAML and those kind of concepts are still the same. You just have to relearn a couple of new property names, basically. So this then should look very familiar. You can do that stack layout. I should probably update this slide because we now have optimized stack layouts, which have a horizontal stack and a vertical stack layout, so that it's easier to lay out. But this does it vertically, automatically, the stack layout, and then you can have that label and that button, and then we will automatically translate that label and that button however it should look like on that platform. You have a lot of styling options to actually, make it look like how you want it. Then you can work with data binding if that's what you want to implement that MVVM framework. So you see the binding for the text and that click command. And if we then go look at the code behind, then you can see it wires up and it's just C# code, right? And you can write mobile apps with that. Now, if you want to do all of this in C#, you totally can right now. Everything you can do in XAML, you can do in C#. But the kind of like the logic right now isn't great because then you would have to go like var stack layout is new stack layout, var label is new label, stack layout.children.add label. Then you have to create a button. It's a lot of C# code, right? So to overcome that, a lot of people were like, I want to do this better. We now have the C# markup extensions. Those already exist for Xamarin, for Xamarin Forms in the Xamarin Community Toolkit. We now also have it for the .NET Maui Community Toolkit. So that allows you to write your your UI in C#, but in a more fluent syntax, right? So you can just say, I don't know, stack layout dot children. I don't have a lot of experience with it, so I'm just going to stop here. But it's a lot nicer than creating the plain old C# code. Basically, it's a nicer syntax. What we're also looking into is more like the MVU style application. So that's kind of like getting rid of MVVM. Now we're going to do model view update, which has been popularized by like Swift UI, Jetpack Compose for Android. So we are looking into what we can do right now. Our name for that right now is Comet. It's experimental at the time, but go look into it if it's something that you're interested in. And hopefully we can build that into .NET Maui directly for you as an option as well. I already mentioned it. We have a lot of styling options. So of course we support dark theme, light theme. So whenever you flip that over, then all the things should adapt automatically. You have all kinds of extensions and options to specify different colors, different images for whenever your user is switching between light and dark. We have static and dynamic styles. So basically, you just put in that style once, or it's being evaluated during runtime. So you can create your own kind of theming engine for your whole application if that's what you want. You could do styling through XAML or even CSS if you're more comfortable with using that. You can totally do that. And all kinds of other things. Images from many formats, including SVG. I'll get to that in a little bit. Now, I already mentioned if you're coming from Xamarin Forms, you probably know the term custom renderers. And I all the way from Pakistan, I can hear people now going like, custom renderers. I still have bad dreams about that. I totally understand, right? That was something that it gave you a lot of power. You could do a lot of cool things, but it was kind of heavy, right? Just to customize that one property, you had to create an inheritance. You had to know a lot about how those renderers worked. So that was one of the big pain points that Xamarin Forms developers had. Now, with the new handler and mapper architecture, we're making this much easier. So this is basically everything you need to do to get rid of the underline on Android. This is just styling one property on Android, basically. So you can hook into that handler. We have to make sure that we're only running this for Android, right? So you're going to see probably in a lot of samples these if dev compiler directives. Personally, I hate them. I don't really like them. It clutters your code. There is ways around them, but in a lot of samples, you will still see this probably. Then you can access that handler from anywhere because it's a static thing. So you can just say handlers, entry handler, you can go into the mapper, and then you can say append to mapping, you can say prepend to mapping, or you can say modify mapping. Now, the difference here, you're probably going to use append to mapping most of the time, because that means all of the .NET Maui renderers are going to, not the renderers. .NET Maui mappings are going to run first, and the mappers are kind of like our thing to map the abstract property to whatever that's supposed to be on the platform, right? That's what the mapper does. And what this does, the append to mapping, is the .NET Maui, so the ones that we as a team implemented are going to run first, and then you're going to append yours at the bottom, right? So we're going to render the entry the way that we thought it should be, but you're like, no, I don't want to have that underline, so you're going to append that little mapping at the end, so that you can remove that underline again. You can also do prepend, which is a very specialized one, because then you're going to run your mapper before ours are going to run. So there's a chance that it might get overridden, or you can modify the mapper, and that's basically saying like, okay, .NET Maui team, you've done a wonderful job with this mapper. I'm not going to use it. I'm just going to write my own complete mapper. So you'll replace the whole thing basically, which is typically not things that you want to do. So yeah, and that's how you can then access like the platform view. So in this case, like you can see the android.views.entry underline visible false. You can write all the platform code like this. So that is really, really cool. Now, another thing that we're kind of like investigating is this is no. I'm sorry. I'm confused. This is something that's built into Microsoft Maui right now. Microsoft.maui.graphics. In .NET Maui, we also create an abstraction for like the platform drawing engine. So we did on iOS, you have like a thing, a method, a library to draw lines, to draw all kinds of shapes. On Android, same thing. On Windows, same thing. But you had to know all these different APIs, right, for the platform ones. And with .NET Maui, we want to have that abstract layer, so you don't have to learn about all the separate platforms. So what we did with Microsoft Maui.graphics is we abstracted also those libraries. So now you can just say, I want to draw a line, I want to do something with fonts, I want to do something with PDFs. You can totally do that from a unified API, and it will be super, super fast. It will be very performant because it uses the platform APIs under the covers, right? We're just going to make that translation for you, and it will be super fast because it's running on that platform. Now, really quick, before we finally go into that demo, we've also made a lot of project system improvements. So before, again, if you're coming from Xamarin Forms, you know this structure, right? On the top, we have our shared library. So that's where you want to have all your XAML or your code, because if it's in there, you can share all your code. And then we have like the applications for my app.android, my app.ios. Because those are kind of like the bootstrap projects to create the actual iOS project and the actual Android application, right? Because at the end of the day, Apple and Google are not going to say, hey, yeah, Microsoft, just send us the exe and we'll make it work. That's never going to happen. So we still have to create that AAB file, that IPA file. So that's kind of why it makes sense we have these separate projects, right? Because we still have to have the metadata, all the images, all the stuff for a specific Android application and a specific iOS application. But now we've implemented a way to make that even easier for you. So we have the single project. So all the things have been smashed together, and now we have this one project. So we have my app, and you can see that we now have a little platforms folder, which has Android, iOS, Windows. There's actually more in there right now, Mac Catalyst, Tizen. And whenever you do something inside of those platforms folders, you could still write all the platform code. So you don't lose any of that power. Those are basically your separate projects that we had before, but now in the same project. So in those platforms, you can write, here it is shown with a Bluetooth adapter for Android, iOS, Windows, but everything outside of that platforms folder is shared, including the resources. So you can now very easily add that font, which is something that you had to do per platform. So you would duplicate those fonts, which is a pain because, if you update it in one and not the other, then suddenly it looks all bad on one platform, right? And the same with images. You can now plug that image in the resources here, preferably that SVG that I mentioned earlier, because that scales, and we will automatically create all the resolutions for iOS, Android, all the platforms that you want. Because if you've been working with this before, then iOS already wants like 3 variations of each image, right, for each resolution, each scaling. For Android, it's even crazier. They want a gazillion different resolutions for all this stuff. So we do that automatically. Just give us a very big PNG or an SVG. We will scale it to all the right resolutions. You don't need to worry about that anymore. Just use those images one time inside of this single project, and it will all work basically. So how does it know what to run? Well, here in the run menu on Visual Studio, you just click that thing. It changed a little bit for .NET Maui applications, and now you can say, hey, you can choose the iPhone if it's in there. You can choose the Android emulator if that's what you want, or you can choose the Windows one, and we will automatically sort out all the code, all the things that need to happen for that platform, and we will build that for you. So faster development. It can take a long time. I just was setting up the demo, and especially on Android, getting to run that first time Android, there's just a lot of stuff to build. So that first time deploying Android can take a lot of time. And we're finding ways to make that faster, right? So that you don't have to stop and rerun your whole application, go through the whole deployment. So one of the things that we've been doing, I know it shows Xamarin Forms. I definitely need to still update this slide. But it also works for Xamarin Forms, is XAML hot reload. So whenever you change something inside of your XAML, you can see it automatically updates live in your running applications. This works on the simulator, this works on the emulator, this works on a physical device. So all the styling things, it will update automatically, so you don't have to go like, I'm going to try this new shade of blue, and then you start the application, you wait for minutes and minutes, and then it's like, oh no, this is not the right blue, and you have to do the whole thing again just to get that new color, right? We don't want to have that anymore. Now we also have .NET Hot Reload, which is really cool, which allows you to even change actual C# code while you're running the application. So you don't have to even stop your debugging session there, which is really amazing. I'll show you that in a demo in a little bit. Windows and iOS, that's always a question too. Like, hey, can I finally develop iOS apps from Windows? Yes and no. We have a solution that's called Hot Restart. If you go to this video that I link here, this is showing it for Xamarin Forms. I have a new video for .NET Maui incoming as well. But what you can do with Hot Restart is plug in your iOS device inside of a Windows physical device. And you have to have a paid Apple developer account. But if you're going to the store, you have to have that anyway. And you have to have a physical iOS device. But if you have that, you can plug it in directly to your Windows machine, and you can start developing your app that way. But Apple still requires your app to be built on a Mac to actually go to the store. So you can get around that with App Center and Azure DevOps and GitHub Actions even. They have like Mac build hosts that you can build your app on. So you could develop the whole thing on Windows, still go through those pipelines that you can deliver to the App Store. But I think you also have to renew a certificate by Apple each year for your developer account. And that can only be done on a Mac. And you can rent a Mac for a certain time. Rent in macincloud.com is one of the services, I think. But if you want to have the best and easiest experience, it's just easiest to go out, get a Mac, and do it that way. But you can do it if that's what you want without a Mac. We also have the remote iOS simulator, so kind of like related to all of this. You can get that Mac. What I hear a lot of people are doing is get a Mac Mini. That's kind of like the cheapest one. You can just plug it in with a network cable, a power cable, and you can have it somewhere in your network. You don't even have to see it. You have to set up a couple of things, but then you can connect to it from Visual Studio. And one of the things you can do is the remote iOS simulator. Which basically just mirrors the iOS simulator that's running on your Mac on your Windows machine. So you just can stay in Windows, can stay in Visual Studio, but you will be able to have that iOS simulator there, but you will have to have the Mac for that because the simulator only runs on a Mac. But this is just options for you. So what do we have more? We also had Essentials. So in the early previews, we had .NET Maui Essentials, and we still have. Don't get me wrong, we still have. But it was also called Essentials. And at some point, we decided, like, hey, maybe if the people don't know really the history about the Essentials, how it came to be, the Essentials name is kind of weird, right? So we're going to divide all the APIs into more logical places. So now the battery, I think, is in Microsoft.Maui.devices. I think the all kinds of sensor things are now in Microsoft.Maui.devices.sensors. So it's more logical places so people can easily discover all of those APIs. But all the APIs are still there, and they're still I think even 100% the same. So if you know how to work with it, it should be very easy to transition or to use it again. It's all just built into .NET Maui right now. Another thing that we're doing is Blazor Hybrid, if time allows it, because I'm already talking way too long about all of this. I can show you a little bit of Blazor as well, which allows you to create hybrid applications inside of .NET Maui. So you can take that Blazor application, put it in a .NET Maui app, and still leverage all the power of the device and the platform and all the APIs and sensors and cameras and geolocation stuff in there. One thing, this was the thing that I was thinking about when I started to talk about the Maui graphics, that we're also trying to investigate is like the drawn controls, because right now .NET Maui, as as it has always been, we're translating that button to however that button should look like on the platform, right? But we've also had a lot of people say like, hey, why don't you do more like the Flutter approach, right, where you draw all the things? So we're doing this little experiment with Microsoft Maui Graphics controls, where we draw all the controls and see how that works, see if people will like that. So if that's something that you're interested in, go check out that repository and interact with us there, basically. All right, about time for that demo. So let's get into that. Now I'm going to do a little magic trick here. Ooh, and it locked me out. That is too bad because I'm on my Mac here, but I'm just going to log into my Windows machine. Oh, now it does it on the wrong screen. Oh my gosh. There we go. This should do it. No, come on. I should keep it here then until it's connected. There we go. That's what I wanted to see. Okay. So I was still preparing some things. Excuse me for that. Let me do this, and I'm going to start a new one here. So I'm using Visual Studio 2022 Preview right now. You don't have to do that. As of Visual Studio 2022 17.3, you can now use the stable version. It will have all the .NET Maui templates, and you can just start working for that. If you want to be on the preview, you can even install them side by side if that's what you want. You can totally do that. It has all the .NET Maui bits as well. And of course, you need to have .NET 6 installed. I think that comes automatically with Visual Studio 2022. So whenever you do that, you can go here and create a new project. It looks very big on my screen. That's because I pumped up the font so you can really see it well over there. So if you're going to install, this is not the new theming or the new styling. This is just because I tried the settings and you can see it very well now. You can here search for Maui and we will get a couple of project templates. We have the .NET Maui app, which is just your regular project. The .NET Maui Blazor app, I'll talk about that in a little bit, and the .NET Maui class library, which is a specialized class library, so a DLL, which can contain your shared code that you want to share between different projects, right? So I'm not going to talk about that one today. I'm just going to go with the .NET Maui app, and whenever you do that, it's going to suggest you a little name where you want to place it. It's going to ask you like, hey, do you want to use .NET 6? Whenever .NET 7 comes out in November, you could probably select .NET 7 here and .NET 8 and .NET 9 whenever it comes out. But this should be good most of the time. And I already did that. So whenever you do that, and it will generate a little project for you, you will land here, which is your main page.xaml, right? So this is all the XAML. It has a scroll view. There's that vertical stack layout that I mentioned, which is the specialized one. We have a little image, a label, a button. And if we run this on Windows, then you're going to see a little waving.net bot with a little label that says hello world. While this is building, you can also see this, like I said, the accessibility. So this is really built in right now. It's also inside of our templates, semantic properties, that heading level. So whenever you're vision impaired, you can have this great design that will guide you through all the things visually. But if you're impaired, if you can't see very well or not at all, then that doesn't mean anything, right? So with these semantic properties, you can now say, hey, excuse me. This heading level is level 1 and level 2, so it will know, like the screen reader will know how to go through the application and how to give a little description about the things that you're seeing. So, that's all to make it a little bit easier to make your apps accessible. Now, what else do we got? Let's talk a little bit about that solution right here. So about the project structure. This is what I basically explained to you. So we have this Maui program. Someone not too long ago asked me, like, why is it Maui program and not program.cs? I think that's because we still have a program.cs inside of our iOS code. because typically whenever you start any other C# project, then it's like program.cs, right? But for us, it's Maui program.cs. We always want to be a little bit special. But here, if you've been working with like ASP.NET and ASP.NET Core and maybe some other projects inside of the .NET ecosystem, this will probably look familiar, right? We now have this generic host builder where we say, hey, create builder. And then we can say builder, use Maui app, configure fonts. And we can also use dependency injection now. So I can just say builder.services add transient or add singleton or add all the things, right? And I can just add these things here as you would expect them to work in ASP.NET. And I can just say main page, so I can register my main pages here. And then inside of a constructor, I can just say here, this doesn't make sense what I'm writing right now, but I can say main page, and it will automatically get injected in this constructor. So that just works. We adopted that from like the other C# projects, in the .NET projects, basically in this ecosystem, so that it looks and works familiar with projects that you might already know. So if you're familiar with working with ASP and you want to look into cross-platform development, then now it's a lot easier to get into it because you will already know a couple of the concepts that you see here. Excuse me, my throat is not really great. So you can, because cross-platform development is, is hard enough as it is. So anything that we can do to lower that threshold, basically, is what we're trying to do here. So we've got that now built in, which is really cool. All right. And this machine is taking a really long time. It's probably early for the machine as well to actually build this Windows application. What we also did, if you know a little bit about Xamarin Forms, we had a thing called Shell. And Shell will give you a lot of stuff about navigation, how things could look. You totally have all the power and options to model it any way you want. But Shell is now the default in our templates. So you will get a lot of stuff for that automatically as well. Oh, it doesn't even work. That's interesting. So we have all that. Also, what we're giving you is like all the styling. So under the resources, again, note that this is in the single project resources. So this is all shared. We have a lot of styling options right here. So we have these colors, which is a big list of all the colors that we've defined just to get you help started. And then we have a default styling for basically all the controls that are in here. So you don't have to immediately go out to the documentation. If you want to tweak all this, you could just play with this a little bit and see what effect it has on your application, so that it, you can style your application any way you want. This is just to help you get started. Now, here's that run menu. Windows is obviously not working with me today, the demo gods and all of that. So here you can see that new run menu, and you can see a lot of options here, right? So I have this Android emulator. Let's just try that to see if we can get it running. Actually, let's get started on that. While I'm talking through this, because it might take a little bit as well. Oh, this seems to go fast. That's cool. But in that menu, oh, now I can't click it anymore. You also saw like the iOS simulator, because I'm connected to my Mac build host on the network here. So I could click that iOS simulator. It would run on this Visual Studio as well. I could click the Windows one. It should run on Windows normally whenever your machine is working with you. But you could click all the targets there and it will start running. Also, your physical devices, of course, if you plug in your physical Android device, it will start working with that as well. Here for the Solution Explorer, what else is there? So probably it's important to look at this platforms one. So this still has all the metadata because we still need that, right? Like I mentioned, we still need that AAB file, IPA file. So we have that Android manifest here. We have a little bit of bootstrapper code for the main activity. Same thing for iOS, of course, the info plist, the app delegate. And whenever you want to run or write, you probably don't want to write platform-specific code, but you need to write platform-specific code at some point to do that Bluetooth thing, or I don't know, something other exotic. We have a lot of great plugins. Shiny handles the Bluetooth stuff. But there's always stuff to find that's not supported, or you want to do it a little bit different. Just create a new class inside of one of the platform folders, and it will automatically land you into Android world or iOS world. You can already see like we have all the Android namespaces here, right? So Visual Studio is getting better because this is known as a multi-targeting project, the whole .NET Maui project now. And here, this combo box will allow you to switch between the different contexts. Oh, I see only Android is here now. So Visual Studio was kind of like ramping up for the multi-target projects. There wasn't a lot of projects that were using it, but now .NET Maui is the first big one. So if you find yourself here, seeing all kinds of red squigglies. It might be because this is set to iOS or some platform that is not supported here, but it seems they pretty much fixed it right now. But before you could select iOS here, and then obviously it wouldn't know about all these namespaces and whatnot, so it would seem that you would have a lot of errors, but actually you were not because you were just selecting the wrong target, right? So that makes sense. All right, so yes, whew, on Android it did work. Here we have our Android application, and as any good file new template, we have this little incrementing counter. That's something that you need to do for a new project, apparently. So we can click that thing, and you will have all the things, right? And what I showed you in the slides early, we have this XAML live preview, which is not really a designer that people really want, but it's something, right? So you don't have to switch between the emulator and the simulator all the time. You can even like select things in here, and it will select it automatically inside of the XAML. You can inspect all the colors here. But what it also does is if we go to this main page right here, and I say no, this button should be background color red, and I save that, it will update automatically here in this thing as well. And in our running application, you can immediately start using it, right? So that's really cool. And if you also this is the XAML hot reload, but I also told you about the .NET hot reload, right? I was going to say the .NET Maui hot reload, but it's for also other projects, not just for .NET Maui. And you can say now here in the main page, I can say this counter clicked. It's not going to do plus, but it's going to do plus is 10. And I do have to click this little flame icon here, which is the hot reload, so it will trigger it. You can configure it to do it automatically whenever you save. And now whenever I go here, it might be a little bit small depending on where you're watching this, but it's now going to increment with 10 at a time. So I didn't do anything. I didn't stop my application. I can just change this code, reload it a little bit, and boom, the changes are here, which is really amazing. This is really a productivity boost. So that is really amazing. All right, I'm getting some pings about there's questions, and I have the chat open here. So, oh, that's interesting. This is Samer, my good friend Samer here is saying, do we have to stop using on appearing and start using on navigated too? So I think this kind of originated. We have a monthly .NET Maui community stand-up every first Thursday of the month. Go watch it on the .NET channel. And I think there was a discussion there that you shouldn't use the on appearing to kind of load your data, do all kinds of other things. I would refer to go watch that video, because honestly, I know it happened, but I didn't really watch the video to some extent. But coincidentally, I had the same discussion with another person who is writing a book on .NET Maui, who was also loading a lot of stuff in on appearing, and I know it's kind of like being frowned upon, right? But why people are doing it is because in the constructor you cannot do any async stuff, and the on appearing you can do async stuff. So, and examine forms, we kind of like only had the on appearing event, but now we have a lot more. I think we also have loaded. You can do on navigated too, and the on appearing, it's just not great because you can run into issues with like showing modal dialogues. You can run into issues with things already kind of appearing and then it's just not great. It's also kind of like a gut feeling thing on appearing. It can break a lot of things. If you're like a more experienced developer, you probably run into it sometimes. So you probably want to get ways around that. But I have to yet to dig in to what you should do exactly. And of course, I always get the questions like, what is the best way? There is no best way, right? If you can find a way that works for you, that's the best way for you, right? There's no one single best way, best solution for anything. A little bit of knowledge here in the early morning for me. Naweed, my other good friend Naweed, Gerald is on steroids early this morning. I hope that is a good thing and not really a bad thing. Thank you so much for joining. And I think this was all about the on appearing. So I hope that helped. All right, so was that all of my demo? I think so. So let's quickly hop back into a couple of slides because I want to quickly touch upon like .NET Maui and the Blazor thing that I've been mentioning, which is kind of like the best of both worlds. And here's a little PowerPoint animation that cost a lot of time to make, so we're just gonna watch it finish first. So with .NET Maui Blazor, you can build cross-platform native apps that run on Windows, macOS, iOS, and Android. So all the platforms that I mentioned for .NET Maui, which is not really a coincidence. You can use your existing Razor class libraries, and you can have full platform device access. So maybe let's just take a step back for the people who are not really aware. Blazor is our solution for creating web applications without JavaScript. Yay! No, that's kind of like, that's always the fun thing to explain. You can love JavaScript, you can hate JavaScript. I can talk a lot of time about JavaScript, but in the time that I'm talking about it, probably a gazillion new JavaScript frameworks have come out, so maybe I shouldn't do that. But the thing is, if it's JavaScript or not, whenever you have to switch between one language and the other, whether that's JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, you name it, it's going to eat into your productivity, right? So that's just not going to be great. So what we wanted to do with Blazor is create single page applications based on C#. You never have to leave C#. You never have to leave Visual Studio. You can use NuGet packages. You can use all that thing. And now we are bringing that to .NET Maui. And not just to .NET Maui, you can even use it in WPF. And you can even use it in WinForms. Oh my gosh. So you can just implement that Blazor web view, which is a single element. You can use that inside of your layout. And if you still have that WinForms application, because face it, we watch these sessions and we all dream about using .NET 6 at our day jobs. But the reality is that maybe Monday you're going back to the office and you still have that legacy application that you also have to work on. So, you can now start modernizing that WinForms application. You have to bring your WinForms application to .NET 6. That's a minor detail. But whenever you do, you can use that Blazor web view inside of your WinForms application. And you can start kind of modernizing from there. Maybe you rebuild your whole WinForms application as a Blazor application now, kind of side by side. And you can already start using components from your Blazor application inside of your WinForms application. That's really powerful in kind of like these transition scenarios, I think. So that's a really cool path that we've opened up here, I think. But we're talking about Blazor Hybrid specifically here, and Blazor Hybrid is an extension of Blazor. So until now we had Blazor Server, Blazor WebAssembly, which is kind of like Blazor running on a server, kind of like more traditional, and Blazor WebAssembly is kind of like more how a single page application on JavaScript would work these days, where everything is executed on the client. Both have pros and cons. I have a complete session on .NET Maui Blazor and Blazor Hybrid. So it's somewhere on my YouTube channel. Go find that if that's what you're more interested in. But now we have this hybrid approach. And what is really cool is that it loads your Blazor application inside of a .NET Maui application. But because we're already running on C# and .NET, it's just a .NET application. So we don't have a web view in the traditional sense where it's going to interpret all the HTML and CSS. Well, it's still going to do that, but not all the JavaScript, right? Because we already have that .NET runtime running for our .NET Maui applications. So we can directly run our Blazor applications as a .NET Maui application as well. It's not going to go through a server. It's not going to be interpreted or whatnot. It's going to run as it were a native .NET Maui application. So that's what's really powerful about this, and that's why it performs great as well. Like I already mentioned, it's implemented through a Blazor web view. So the only thing web basically still about it is the HTML and CSS. So if you're coming from a web development world and you feel familiar with that, but you want to dip your toe into like the real cross-platform native development, or your boss wants to really have that icon in the store, so you can just create a Blazor application and create it as a real app on a mobile device. Now you can totally do that with all the skills that you already have. And you can still have all the power to go out and get that camera, right? Because again, it's all C#. It's still a .NET Maui application as well. So you can just go inside of your platform APIs. You can access that camera. You can access the location. You can access the GPS. You can access all the things that you can do with the .NET Maui application, because again, it's not running inside of a web view in a traditional sense. So you're not bound to a web view sandbox. You can do inside of the browser, if you go to a website who wants to format your hard drive, it can't, luckily, right? We don't want to have that. It can't just access your camera. You have to give permission, all that kind of stuff. But now with a .NET Maui Blazor application, a Blazor hybrid application, you can totally format the hard drive, right? So you have access to that, which is probably not something that you want to do for your users, but just to give you an example of the sandbox not being there and the things that you can do. So how is this actually implemented? If you know a little bit about Blazor, then you're going to see familiar things in a little bit. So we have that Blazor web view where we have to point it to a little page, which is going to be our HTML page where all the Blazor stuff is going to be hosted and loaded. And then we have to point to a root component, which is basically our bridge to how Blazor works. And we can say like, hey, this main.razor, this is the entry point of our Blazor application. And from that point on, it's a Blazor application, and you can do everything in Blazor if that's what you want. So I'm going to show you this in a demo beta, by the way. That's why I skipped over it really fast, because I need to save some time here. But we have some Mythbusters. So this is basically everything that I just mentioned already. It runs 100% natively in one process, so no server process to actually create that web application. That also means no HTTP requests, unless, of course, you need to go out to a server, right? Unless you need to get data from a REST API or something like that. But if you want to create an offline application, you totally can do that with .NET Maui Blazor. And the only thing HTML about it is still the HTML and CSS. That's what I said. So while I'm skipping back to this thing, I noticed there were a couple of more questions, also from BITLogix itself. So question, can we control audio, video in Maui? I released a plugin, which is called plugin.maui.audio, which allows you to play a little audio inside of your .NET Maui application, of which you can control the volume, the balance, basically all the things. In the .NET Maui Community Toolkit, we have we should still implement it, I think. We have a media element, which is more like a fully featured media player, which allows you to play video and audio and all the things, but we still have to implement that. And I hope, because I really want to have that inside of the box for .NET Maui directly for modern apps, that's something that we really should have. So I'm hoping to bring that to .NET Maui itself soon-ish. But yeah, there's at least options to make this work. Another thing from Muhammad, I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. Can I convert a Xamarin Forms project to .NET Maui? Yes, we have the .NET Upgrade Assistant. I don't think it's fully ready yet. I think it's in preview right now. But that will try to convert your Xamarin Forms application to .NET Maui. There are certain things that it will do. There are certain things that it won't do. And personally, I probably would opt for just creating a file new .NET Maui project and then start copying over things. Because if you're going to use the upgrade assistant, there's a lot of logging and it's going to tell you from each step what it's going to do. But there's still a little bit of magic to it, right? So, and there's already said, like, if you're going to use the upgrade assistant, it's probably not going to be like converting and then run and then it works, right? There's still work for you to be done. It will rename the namespaces. It will tell you a little bit like, hey, these plugins are probably not supported yet. It will do a couple of other things. But your app will probably not run as a result of running the upgrade assistant. So then you will probably have a lot of time to spend on like figuring out what the upgrade assistant did, and retrace the steps there and then try to fix that. And in my opinion, it's then easier to just create a file new .NET Maui application, start copying things over, see what works, what doesn't work, and then fix those things. But you're in control of what's happening and you understand completely of what you've been doing up to that point, right? So that makes it much easier to figure out what went wrong and where to look for things. But that's just me. There is a automated tool to get you there along the way. Of course, you can always just try it, see what it does, because, you know, as long as you don't commit it to GitHub or Git, not GitHub necessarily, then you should be fine, right? So you can just try it out, see what it does, and if not, you can throw it away and do it yourself. While I was doing this, I could have loaded the other project, maybe. That would have been smart. So I already created a file new .NET Maui app, Blazor app, that I just showed you in the dialogue. And if you look at this, you're going to see something interesting, right? So if you're familiar with Blazor, then you see a little bit of Blazor in this template. We've just looked at the .NET Maui template, and they basically took those two templates, smashed it together, and boom, now we have this .NET Maui Blazor template, right? So that's basically how that worked. Um, and you can see in the Maui program, we still have that app builder, but now we have a couple of extra things. So we do the add Maui Blazor web view. That's a little thing to initialize it. And here we have the if debug add Blazor web developer tools. So if you're going to debug this, it's now inside of .NET Maui, it's just going to say, hey, it's a web view. I don't understand, right? So what you can do is, depending on the platform that you're running on, so if you're running on Windows, you can start Edge, and you can go to the browser tools, and it should pick up on like, hey, there's an application running with a web view. Do you want to debug that? And you totally can. For iOS, it's going to be Safari, and for Android, it's going to be Chrome, obviously. So you can use those developer tools also to debug your .NET Maui Blazor application. Now here is that main page that just consists now of this Blazor web view, which is also kind of interesting, right? So you can take multiple approaches here. You can have like your full view being a Blazor web view. That's what this is. And then build everything in Blazor. Or you can kind of mix and match. You can make that Blazor web view just one element or one page inside of your application. So if you want to do that, you could maybe so you could make this a tabbed page. I don't have the time to show all of this right now, but you could make this a tab page, and then you would have to make this a content page because each content page is going to be a tab then, right? And you can have all these Blazor web views, right? And then you will get like the tabs as if they should look on Android and iOS. But now you will have a Blazor web view in each of them, right? Or you could make one content page, which is a native page, and one Blazor web view page. So you can play with this and do all kinds of cool things, depending on what your scenario is. But if you do it like this and just load that one Blazor web view, it will here point to that local main, and that can be found here, which is suddenly a Razor page. And here we can find this router, which is the entry point of our Blazor application. So here, you specify an app assembly, and that's the assembly. We just have one assembly now, so an assembly is a DLL, and it's going to scan this assembly for these pages, because in these pages we have this add page, and this is a slash, so this is the root. And if we go to counter, we have the slash counter, right? So it's going to scan that, and it's going to hook up all those routes so that whenever you go to one of these, it knows where to go to, basically. And then whenever a route is found, it's going to do this thing here. And whenever it's not found, so that's basically your HTTP 404 scenario, then it's going to show you a little bit like, hey, there's nothing to show at this address, right? So whenever we do that, and again, if you know the Blazor application, looks exactly like the file new Blazor application. It will have the same layout. It will have all the same things. But what's really cool is that you now get all these kinds of responsiveness and adaptiveness from the web. So Bootstrap is provided automatically with this. So whenever you have a big view size, it will automatically show the bar on the side. But if you have like a small form factor like this Android, it will automatically collapse, and you will have this hamburger menu to go to all the things, right? So we have this counter. Like I said, every new template has to have a counter, and we can click it here, and this just works. So that's really cool. But if I rotate the device, it will have a little bit more space, and now you can see it will transform automatically because we're using Bootstrap, the HTML, CSS stuff, and it will automatically put the little menu there on the side, right? Because we suddenly have enough room to do that. So you will get all those responsive stuff from Bootstrap, which is really, really cool. You will get that for free. It will cost you a little bit more effort to do the same thing on .NET Maui, basically. But you can totally do that with all of this. Now, and here, like I said, you have this counter. So this is all just, it brings you back to kind of like the PHP or ASP.NET Classic stuff, where you can mix your HTML with code and all the things here. But you can see you will never have to leave C# while writing your web applications here. So that is really amazing. Anything else? Still, one thing that I quickly want to highlight, there's a lot of stuff to cover here, and I don't have enough time to do so. But what you can still do, you can actually see it here. You can still register your dependency injection stuff with like builder services the exact same way as we just seen in .NET Maui. And now if we go here to fetch data, you can see that we can get it through the Blazor way with this little inject thing to get that forecast service, right? So you can just inject it in this way, and it all works together. So you can really mix and match and do all kinds of cool stuff with this. I'm being notified I only have 2 minutes left, so I have to talk faster than I already did. I can hear you all the way cheering here from like, yes, this is all amazing. I just want to skip the rest of the event and go home and play with all this stuff. I could totally imagine, but hold on. I got 2 minutes left, so get back in your seat. I still have a couple of things to tell you. Here we have a .NET Podcasts app, which is a fully featured showcase app, basically, that you can use. You can inspect. It's open source. You can find it at the link there. It actually has a running version online as well, and it has a platform native .NET Maui app. It has the same mobile app, but now built in Blazor, and the website is built in Blazor as well. So that's really interesting to look at as a kind of like showcase and see how people building those apps are actually doing things. So that is really amazing to look at if you're looking for some kind of example. Now, what else do we got? I get a lot of questions then, of course, with all these options, like when should I use .NET Maui Blazor? When should I use .NET Maui, or should I use it at all? Or when should I use Blazor? And basically the answer to all of this is yes. Right? We should use all of them. But it really depends on what you're using it for, right? I already mentioned kind of like whenever you want to do this, if you have that legacy application, if you're a web developer looking into cross-platform development, if you have an existing Blazor application and you want to go cross-platform, and just because you can, just because it's cool stuff, right? And you have the weekend, well, it's Saturday, and you want to play with some new stuff, you totally can with this. But there's all kinds of paths that you can go here. Like I said, there's not one single best option to do all these things. It's just what you enjoy working with mostly. And for your job, of course, there's a lot of requirements like budget. What knowledge do you already have? What can you reuse? All that kind of stuff. So just figure that out. Then again, with all the options, putting them in a little graph kind of thing here. Whenever reach is important to you, then you probably want to go for a website or a progressive web app. And that's basically your Blazor application. You just create that Blazor web application that runs on anything that has a browser, which is pretty much any device right now. If you want to go hybrid, so you can go with Blazor and Maui, which is in kind of like the same ballpark as Electron, or a native app with a web view. Please don't do that, but you totally can do that. And if you want to go for the power, really leverage the power and performance of a device, then you want to go with Maui. Or if you don't have the need for cross-platform, you can go with WinUI, WinForms, WPF, and you will really have that native power of an app. And with that, thank you so much for joining. I hope you've learned a ton on this session. Please enjoy the rest of the event. I know there's a lot of other interesting sessions coming as well. If you still have any questions, please reach out on Twitter or email. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, and have a good rest of your day. Thanks so much for having me.